What's going on, guys? It's Horse Beef here, and I'm bringing you another tier list video. You didn't expect this one. This is the biggest wasted talents in UFC history. So these guys would have had to compete in the UFC to be considered for this list. Otherwise, this list would seriously get out of hand. But I'm going to be ranking them as far as what their potential was. From my perspective. So let's just get into it, man. First one, Thomas Almeida, knocking dudes out like crazy on the regional scene, and comes into the UFC. I think knocks out a few dudes and then just runs into too high level of competition. Unfortunate to have to fight Cody Garbrandt during his rise. Lost to Rob Font, lost to Jimmy Rivera, Jonathan Martinez, and Sean O'Malley. Those are his losses. So he lost to high level competition only. So based off of his skill set, he should have probably been in title contention at some point. Never got to those heights, but his potential was high. I used to love watching Thomas Almeida on his come up. I myself hyped him up quite a bit, but is he that high level to where we can put him up here? No, I'd say he fits just about at B tier. And then we get into Edson Barboza, another Brazilian fighter who just never reached the potential, knocking dudes out. Came to the UFC undefeated, and then capped all that off with that insane wheel kick over Terry Edom. Lost couple of wins, but then eventually, man, runs into Khabib, runs into Tony Ferguson, runs into Kevin Lee, goes down to 145 and just never reached the potential that he could have. Even at 145, it looked like he could have gone for a title run. But the dude just never dealt with pressure very well, and eventually his one-dimensional style just caught up to him, and that's pretty much it, man. Guys that can mix it up on him and pressure him backwards and take the kicks away were able to beat him with relative ease. But I do think that the skill set was very high level, and he's one of the best strikers, the way I see it, to ever compete in the UFC, man. Probably the best kicker of all time. So I'll put him in A tier. Shane Carwin, now he was really, really hampered and held back by injuries. Should have probably beat Brock Lesnar and had a stronger legacy, but unfortunately never reached those heights. Lost a couple of fights and then had to retire. Token win against Frank Mir as well. So that does definitely boost him up, but that was his best win. And he was knocking guys out, man, left, right, and center. He was seriously a physical specimen at heavyweight. No gas tank though. Realistically, Shane Carwin, like with the skill level of heavyweights back then, Shane Carwin should have probably been a champion. Never got to that point. I'm going to put Carwin in B tier with Thomas Almeida. Cody Garbrandt, I mean, his potential was high. I think we can all agree with that. As I spoke about when I was speaking of Thomas Almeida, Cody Garbrandt knocked him out, and he was just knocking out everybody on his come up. Styled on Dominic Cruz. I think there were a lot of expectations surrounding Cody Garbrandt that he could defend that title a few times, but then ran into TJ Dillashaw, and from that point on, it was just a downward spiral. Yeah, like a couple of little blips, little positive blips on the record, but never really recovered to the point where he was a serious title contender again, which he should have always been with the natural God-given speed and power that he has. Man was just never able to fulfill that potential. Is he good enough? Was he ever good enough to be put at S tier? Maybe, but I'm going to put Cody Garbrandt in A tier for now. Mark Jacase, just another hyped up Englishman. Good, fun, enjoyable striker to watch. Creative striker. Like, honestly, in a very entertaining style. But I think it goes without saying, he was recently released from the UFC. I think he's going to fight in PFL now. Says all I need to know. I mean, he never really got even close to title contention. I think he was maybe in the top 15 at one point, but honestly, I think maybe he reached his ceiling more than he had wasted potential. I think he was just more overhyped than anything. So I'll put Mark Jacase in D tier. Todd Duffy, at one point, I think had the fastest knockout in UFC history, but just such a short career though, and hampered by injuries, I believe. And also, I think he was on TRT at the age of like 24. I think I saw some interview with him recently. So once he was no longer able to, I guess, supplement himself, Todd Duffy's career kind of fell off a cliff. Now, once again, I don't really know if that is completely to blame. But yeah, I never really rated Todd Duffy to begin with. Like, his skill set was decent, but he was more of a glass cannon. Yeah, I'll put him down here with Mark Jacase. Eric Silva, another overhyped Brazilian, came into the UFC with a crazy record, fighting on the regional scene, and just never reached the heights that he was supposed to. Did have a win over Josh Koscheck. but just fought at that welterweight division during a time where guys like GSP, John Fitch, who I believe he lost to, were reigning at that time, Carlos Condit, people like that. So it was just, it was more unfortunate circumstances than anything. The fact that Eric Silva had to fight in a weight class populated by so many high-level fighters, like some of the best fighters in the world at the time. And like, he was kind of a douchebag too, man. Cheated a few times, had a bad attitude. I don't know. I never rated him really, honestly, that much. So I think I'll put him in D tier as well. Eric Silva. Kevin Lee. Now, he had loads of potential. That knockout over Gregor Gillespie was nasty. I thought for sure maybe that was the beginning of his next title run, and then gets knocked down again. It seemed like every time Kevin Lee would gather some sort of momentum, he would get knocked down a few pegs. And obviously, I have to give sympathy to the man, because his coach, right, during his rise, ended up passing away. So that does suck. And Kevin Lee did always have mad potential. So I think for that reason, I'm going to keep Kevin Lee in B tier. He really did lose to the very best during his run-up. I know he did lose to some lower-level competition towards the end of his UFC career, but during his rise, he was only getting knocked down by some of the best. And he was having very competitive fights with them. And he sees holes in all their games. So, you know what? Kevin Lee, B tier. Kron Gracie, I'm going to put him straight in D tier. He only had potential because of his name. That's it. Some of the worst stand-up I've ever witnessed in MMA history in general. Yeah, I'm sure his jiu-jitsu is high level, but he got absolutely pieced up by Cub Swanson and got absolutely pieced up by Charles Jourdain. Had no answer for him, man. On the feet, I don't know if I've seen a worse fighter. Ryan Hall has better stand-up because at least he throws good kicks. Kron Gracie has nothing on the feet, completely one-dimensional, belongs in some kind of 80cc jiu-jitsu competition, does not belong in MMA, in my opinion. D tier. Johnny Hendricks. Now, he had extreme potential, and he did fulfill his potential, right? He was champion at one point, did beat Robbie Lawler, came very close to defeating GSP, but once he could no longer juice, he had to move up a division because he couldn't cut the weight anymore. He couldn't get as lean as he could before, and proceeded to become dominated at every turn, dominated by Paulo Costa coming up as well. I don't know. I just get the feeling that Johnny Hendricks, with that God-given power and wrestling that he had too, he should have reigned, I think, in that division. And he gave GSP such a close fight. But ultimately, he was a drug cheat. But he was so good. He was so good. So I'm going to keep Johnny Hendricks at A tier. Uriah Hall, I'd say maybe he deserves to be down here at C tiers because he never picked up too impressive wins. I mean, he did get that beautiful knockout, the spinning back kick, I think, to the face, and followed up with the flying knee against Hagar Mousasi, which is a beautiful win to have on the record. And honestly, that spinning wheel kick that he landed in the Ultimate Fighter against, I think it was Adam Sella, one of the scariest things I've ever witnessed in MMA. But I just don't think that he was as tenacious as he needed to be to reach his potential. He was far too gun shy. Could have knocked out everybody, I believe, man. Seriously, this dude was so accurate. He was a sniper. He was a sniper, and he could knock you out with anything that he hit you with. The man was just way too gun shy. Maybe it's down to his good nature. The guy always seemed like a very nice individual. After he knocked out Adam Sella, it's like he scarred himself by knocking out Adam Sella in such a brutal fashion that he became gun shy after that. So damn, that sucks. Such wasted potential. But I think Uriah Hall deserves to be in C tier, man, because he kind of did it to himself at the end of the day, man. Similar to that of Rory McDonald becoming a Christian, right? Very, very similar. Just the guys just lost their killer instinct at a point, and then it was just downhill from there. Michael Johnson. Now, this dude was able to knock out some of the highest level guys at his weight at that time, put Khabib in danger at 1.2, knocked out Dustin Poirier, beat Edson Barboza, beat Joe Lozon, beat Tony Ferguson by decision as well during Tony Ferguson's come up in the UFC. Man, he has some serious legacy wins there, but then he loses to low level competition at every turn. He's getting knocked out now. Even has a win over Artem Lobov, for fuck's sake. Come on now. Michael Johnson, I would say, just based off of what he was able to accomplish at his best, Michael Johnson, with that serious hand speed and power, this dude could have beaten like everyone that he lost to. If something went a bit different, I feel like Michael Johnson could have beaten them. But I don't know what it was, dude. Just something wasn't clicking with Michael Johnson. It's just crazy. I've never seen someone who's able to beat like some of the best lightweights of all time and then lose to no names. It's crazy to me. Michael Johnson definitely deserves to be at A tier, just based off what he was able to accomplish at his best, for sure. Nick Diaz, I think I'm going to put him in the same spot. Arguably, he deserves to be an S tier because this man had his prime stolen away from him with a bullshit illegal drug ban based off of marijuana. Gave tough fight to George St. Pierre. Like, nobody had an easy time against Nick Diaz. No one ever was able to have an easy time against Nick Diaz. Destroyed BJ Penn. I don't know. For me, I feel like Nick Diaz deserves to be at S tier because it's such an unknown. And when he was at his best, he seriously put up tough fights against some of the best guys in the world. So for me, Nick Diaz has to be at S tier as far as a waste of talent goes, and that goes mostly because it was stolen away from him. And that makes me salty. Sage Northcutt. I was never too hot on Sage Northcutt. You know, he's a chiseled jaw, good marketable face, crazy physique, but ultimately the skill set never really matched up to the hype that was being pushed out. So I'm going to put him at D tier. Jimmy Rivera, another individual with a record hampered only by some of the highest level fighters in MMA. I mean, yeah, he had nice boxing and beautiful calf kicks and great wrestling. Ultimately, Jimmy Rivera was a super high-level fighter, but I think he deserves to be down here with Uriah Hall. Does have a win over Uriah Faber, and that was when Uriah Faber was more in his prime, honestly. So very impressive win, shoot up his leg there. Has a win over Thomas Almeida, John Dodson, Coney Stamen. So a decent record there, and fought the best, and really only lost to the best. Lost to Peter Yan, lost to Aljamain Sterling. So like there's no shame. There's no shame in the record, but he just doesn't have enough high-level victories other than Uriah Faber for me to put him much higher. But arguably, he deserves to be up here. You know what? I'm going to put Jimmy Rivera up here, and I'm going to put Thomas Almeida down here because Thomas Almeida really didn't beat anyone at a very high level, while at least Jimmy Rivera has some of those decent names on the record. And then we get into Roy Nelson. Nasty jiu-jitsu, God-given power. Dude, just too lazy. Imagine if he was able or willing to cut down to 205 and fight at a more reasonable weight class where he's a bit leaner. I believe he could have been a serious problem at 205 with the skill set that he had. Has wins over Crow Cop, or knockout wins over Crow Cop, Antonio Silva, Antonio Nogueira. So he does have serious names on the record. So I'm going to put Roy Nelson at B tier. I believe that he had championship potential at 205 if he was willing to make that cut. Johnny Walker, I mean, his career is still going on. He's not exactly old yet, but he's just not the same fighter that he looked like he could have been during his rise, man. That flying knee against Misha Serkunov, the spinning backfist knockout against whoever the hell that was. Ultimately, the chin just came into play, and we all realized that this man is just a glass cannon. So I don't know. I think C tier looks pretty good for Johnny Walker. Brandon the Truth Vera knocked out Frank Mir on his come up, and then ended up running into guys like John Jones during his rise, and ultimately I believe he got a little bit unlucky. Did show some high level skills even in ONE FC after his UFC tenure. Even fought like Ong La, who's a serious Muay Thai practitioner, one of the highest level guys, at least during that time period. But yeah, since then, Brandon Vera has picked up some losses. I think he's on like a 4-fight losing streak in ONE FC. I don't know if he's fought in a little bit, but at the end of the day, Brandon Vera, during his time in the UFC, showed a lot of potential. He was being hyped up as a potential title challenger, but a victim of circumstances, trying to make a title charge when you're in the same division as a young, hungry John Jones is just kind of a death sentence. So that's what happened. Brandon Vera, I would say he probably deserves to be down here in C tier as well. Zabit Magomed Sharipov, I'm putting him directly in S tier, and that's based mostly just off the eye test. He did beat some good competition though. Calvin Cater, Jeremy Stevens, Brandon Davis and Kyle Bochniak. So yeah, his resume isn't that great, but you just have to watch him fight and ignore the resume because he never really had the opportunity. The cardio issues, I believe he had surgery to fix that, but then he just didn't want to continue his career, and I think he has pursued a career in medicine. So good for him. Ultimately, it was his call, but just based off the skill set, he's one of the highest level fighters I've ever watched, just based off eye test. When it comes to technique, everything was exactly how it was supposed to be thrown, down to the boxing, the kickboxing, the sambo, everything. This dude was technically perfect in every area. It was almost unfair, so the gods had to nerf him by giving him terrible cardio and a diaphragm spasm problem. So I believe that we were robbed of witnessing a legendary title run in Zabit. Man, I am bummed by this one. This is probably the one that I'm bummed the most by. For sure, the biggest waste of talent in MMA history, as far as I'm concerned. Darren Till, flappy hands. Darren Till, guy loves a left hand, super one-dimensional. Knocked out Donald Cerrone while he was on the come up. Came very close to beating some guys, man. Like, even when he went up to 185, he got close to beating Derek Brunson, just couldn't do it. He did well against DDP when he had his moments, but he just couldn't get it done. Ultimately, I think he was just way too one-dimensional to ever make it far in the UFC. I can't put him down here with these individuals, though. I do think he's a bit higher level, but I think he sits perfectly at C tier. He is very similar to a Ryan Hall. Not as gun-shy, but a similar skill set. I don't know. He was just too one-dimensional for me. Stefan Struve, man. This dude was like, 6'9" or something. Never learned how to throw a jab. He just never made good use out of his physical gifts. I don't know if his talent was really projected to push him that far, but the physical gifts alone, I feel like he should have done better. But ultimately, that's really all it came down to. So I'm going to put Stefan Struve in D tier. Paulo Costa, now, despite the fact that his UFC career is still going on, and yeah, in theory, he could still make a title charge, although I don't see it happening. He did show some pretty high-level skills coming up. Even has a win over Yoel Romero. A little arguable whether it should have been Yoel or Paulo Costa to get that win. But recently, it's just been a string of disappointing results from Paulo Costa. He's looked good in some of these fights. I wouldn't say he looked that good against Sean Strickland, but he looked good against Robert Whittaker, which shows he can still compete at a higher level. But I don't know. I'm kind of juggling between putting him at B tier and C tier. He did fight for a title, and he has done well against high-level competition. So I'm going to put Paulo Costa at B tier. He does have a win over Luke Rockhold, even though that was a weird fight in very strange circumstances. I think Paulo Costa at B tier makes sense for me. Gegard Mousasi, I'll put him directly at A tier. I would say among all fighters on this list, he might have one of the better resumes. I mean, he has finishes over Dan Henderson, Thiago Santos, Vitor Belfort, Chris Weidman, Uriah Hall, who's on this list too, Mark Munoz, even finished Roy McDonald in Bellator as well. So Gegard Mousasi, I think, probably has the best resume on this list. So you know what? I'm going to have to put him up here in S tier. I think that's the only spot to put Gegard Mousasi. For sure, one of the biggest wastes of talent in UFC history. I think if he stayed in the UFC, because it's not like he got cut or left the UFC because he was on a losing skid. No. I don't know the circumstances surrounding it. I think maybe it was for pay and Bellator is willing to pay him more maybe. But Gegard Mousasi, skill set, resume, I mean, is there anywhere else to put him? It has to be S tier 100%. Anthony Johnson, man, if he fought at 205 his whole career, this dude would have been a champion 100%. I have to put him at A tier. God-given power. This dude was hit so hard. Rest in peace, Anthony Johnson. I believe you deserve to be either an S tier or A tier, but I'm going to put him right here in A tier. BJ Penn, it's weird seeing him on this list because he is considered to be an all-time great, at least by older head UFC fans. Anyone who watched him during his prime knows how good BJ Penn was. I just don't think he worked hard enough. But he still does deserve to be an S tier because this, man, based off of the natural skill set, the natural talent, there's a reason why he was called the Prodigy. Because this dude was so good, so well-rounded, power in his hands, and high-level jiu-jitsu. At that time, the only guys who could compete with him were the best in the world. And I just don't think that he had the motivation to work hard enough to really fulfill that potential. Even if he did become champion, he could have been a long reigning champion if he really put the work in. But ultimately, I will put him at S tier because he is BJ Penn. At the end of the day, he's a legend of the sport. Karo Parisian, one of the highest level judokas in the history of MMA. Although is being a high level judoka enough to really bring you that far in MMA? Maybe it was. He did have some pretty impressive wins on the record. And Nick Diaz and Matt Serra come to mind, which are some pretty good wins to have on the record. But other than that, he never really fulfilled the potential. And as with others on this list, a victim of circumstances. Unfortunately, he had to be fighting at welterweight during the GSP era. Did lose to GSP as well. But I don't know. I'm juggling with either putting Karo Parisian down in B tier or C tier. I'm not too sure. I think I'm going to keep him in B tier because he did have a lot of potential around that time. Anthony Pettis. Now, this one might not be considered to be a waste of potential, but I consider it to be a waste of potential because I just don't think that he worked hard enough. I do think it might have been a laziness problem. He could have been a long-reigning champion. The striking, the kicking game, one of the highest level kickers of all time. And he just looked unbeatable for a good period. But he just seemed to have way too much quit in him. Right? When the going got tough, he never had the grit to really push through. Even in that Tony Ferguson fight, he had that grit for the first round. Then the second, it was over with. It was over with. And then he pretty much gave up. Gets walked down by like. A lot of his losses are similar. It's just him being walked down and giving up and crumbling under the pressure. But he did become champion, though. Does he deserve to be an S tier? Arguably, he does. Wasted talent. Yeah, probably Anthony Pettis has to go in S tier based off merit alone because he does have impressive wins on the record. Of course he does. He was champion at a point. So, of course, Anthony Pettis, I think, should be in S tier. And then the final one on the list is Tony Ferguson. I believe he is a waste of potential, not by his own choice. I think, that whole saga surrounding the Khabib fight, the man just never got the opportunity to show that he could beat Khabib in his prime. Unfortunate circumstances, has to fight Justin Gaethje on short notice, does well in the first round, and then just gets obliterated for the remaining. And stylistically, that always was such a tough matchup for him. So it's unfortunate. When that fight was made, I had a feeling that something like that would happen, and when it happened, it completely deflated me. And unfortunately, what we all expected to happen after a beatdown like that did happen to Tony Ferguson. Now he's on a skid, like a 7-fight losing skid. It sucks. But the potential of Tony Ferguson was that of a champion. He was just never able to reach those heights. Even if he did claim interim gold, man, the boogeyman Tony Ferguson was different gravy. And I don't think any of us will forget that 12-fight win streak that he put up, man. Just left a path of blood and disfigured faces, and we're all lucky to have witnessed it. So Tony Ferguson, gonna keep him in S tier there. And that is the tier list. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. Leave a like if you did in fact like the video, and any ideas you might have for future videos going forward. Let me know in the comment section below. I read all your comments. If you want to start a dialogue or ask me questions or whatever, or call me a casual, you feel free to do that too. And anyway, guys, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next one.